Hello, hello, and welcome again to the Cloud Show. There are so many topics that we want to talk about for cloud leaders and leaders in cloud projects. And there are so many things that we need to discuss and know about when it comes to a successful move to the cloud. We're going to specifically talk about that today, moving to the cloud. So probably most of you know that know that if you have some virtual machines already, you can move them to the cloud and run them there, and that will work just fine. We're going to talk about what makes it more than fine. What makes your business more than fine in the cloud is when you don't just migrate, you might also transform your business to be very suitable for running in the cloud. With me today, I have Dr. Greg Lowe, and we are going to talk about transformations today on the Cloud Show. Hello there, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good. Thanks, Magnus.
Yeah. It's nice to see you. And we are at some distance apart. I'm in Sweden, and you're down under.
Indeed, I actually loved the times I've spent in Sweden over the years, but at the moment I'm freezing in Melbourne.
Freezing? Oh yeah, you have winter time.
Certainly,
you have late summer over here. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, no, it's been a bit cold here for my liking. So, mind you, I don't think I'd like winters in Sweden either. So,
no, you wouldn't. We don't either, but we live here anyway.
Yeah.
So, just to set the record straight, you started or worked for SQL Down Under. What's the story with the company?
Yeah, look, I founded that a very long time ago, really. And look, I've always been a fan. I mean, I've done bits of work for other organizations and things, and but generally, I prefer to work for myself. It's right. I think this is an industry where your life is often better, I think, if you can take control of your own destiny and don't put your destiny in the hands of an organization. I mean, just yesterday, I was reading about, say, friends from Microsoft that have been at the company, more than 20 years, and all of a sudden they're caught up in the force reduction. And
you're preaching to the choirs there, mate. I'm with you, as the expression goes. Preaching to the choirs. So I like also working for myself. So you have your SQL Down Under, and you do your business there, and you do a lot of, as everyone does these days, cloud business in terms of
look. Initially, we're pretty much focused more in the data side of things, but we were very early on with Azure related things, and so I think I've made a point of staying across the vast majority of Azure, which is a tough call over the years, but there's certainly, it has come with that, even though I have a real passion in the application side. There comes, you need, there's a lot I've needed to know and make sure I knew about infrastructure areas, and particularly security areas are another area of strength, but just solutions in general.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. All right. So let's get to it. We wanted to talk today, or you said when I called you up on this that, hey, can we talk about transformations? Yes, sure. So let's first define, right? We want to move our business to the cloud. We have some servers and things running our services and whatever we have, databases and things. We want to migrate them to the cloud and run them there. That's brilliant. And then we want to make it better, or do we want to make it better?
Yeah, look.
What's the transformation part?
Where this comes from is there are a lot of the. I deal with a variety of organizations. So I have startups at one end and tier one financials at the other end. And most of the financials I work with, I do a bit of work with banks and things, but predominantly it's around what we call superannuation companies, or people would call retirement fund companies, or those sorts of things. And what I've seen in a number of organizations over recent years is that they've had sort of CTOs or people like that have been there in place a long time, in many of these organizations. And then what we find is suddenly they're gone and they get replaced by someone who comes in talking about cloud transformation.
Right.
Right? And the boards, I must say, the board of the organization, I think, hears those words, sounds like a wonderful thing. They think, I want some of that,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because they hear it from everybody else around their business circles, and they think, this is something I need to do, right? But the sad thing that I see nearly all the time in these scenarios is that what the companies do when they talk cloud transformation, but they tend to just pick up their existing mess and migrate it to the cloud, and somehow they think they've made a transformation, but they haven't actually transformed anything at all. And so what ends up happening, there's a number of things happen when you do that. The first thing is that it usually takes much longer than they've planned, because there are a number of things that end up being far more complicated because they're trying to replicate what they were doing before, similarly in the cloud.
Yep.
And there are things about that are quite different, right? So
There are.
that's a problem. The second thing that tends to happen with this is that there is a mindset that says, look, what we'll do is we'll just migrate first and then we'll transform later. Right?
Yes.
And this is one I hear again and again and again. And the basic problem that tends to happen with that is that by the time the migration is completed, the company has gone through enormous pain, grief, and agony making that migration occur. It's ended up taking far longer than they planned. It's ended up costing way more than they had planned. And they have really almost burnt out by the time they've done that.
Yeah.
And worse, all of the budget that they were talking about using for doing the transformation work has gone. Right?
Yeah.
So what they've
now
got,
it's too late to go back, right? Now you can't go back. Right? You're stuck.
And they have this, what they now have is a worse implementation in many cases of what they used to have, but now hosted somewhere else. Now there are positive things there, because in some cases, their infrastructure has been so old and they've been holding off upgrading it and things like that. And so getting off that old infrastructure, I can't say that's a bad thing. In many cases, it's a positive thing. But, there's very little beyond that. And the other thing that usually surprises them is that many of the applications that they have work incredibly poorly when they pick them up and move them to the cloud. And again, it's because so many of the applications are designed to be incredibly chatty and things like that. And the minute you introduce some latency or things like that into a cloud, that's a problem, right? And so you see applications that used to take, I don't know, I see an overnight processing recently at a bank that in their on-premises version used to take 2.5 hours. When they first migrated to the cloud with what they thought were 4 times the amount of resources that they had on premises.
Wow.
It was now running over 12 hours, the thing. And this is using the same application. Now, clearly, a big part of what we spend our life doing is helping them change those applications so that doesn't happen. But just picking it up and moving it there is problematic, right? And as I said, I think chattiness is a really, really important one in that. But there are many, many other scenarios as well.
So there's no guarantee that what you had before will be well suited to run well in the cloud. There can be examples of things like workloads that work very nicely in the cloud. You just take them and move them, and it gets better. I mean, it's better than before. It's not worse. You got rid of the old hardware and all that stuff, and now you're using someone else's hardware, and they maintain that, and it's actually cheaper, by the way. So we're doing all right. And then of course there can be horror stories like it's just way worse now.
Absolutely, and this is a big problem. But for me, the people I'm mostly concerned about are the end users, right? Because if you look at it from the business user's point of view, when you do that, all they see is a massive disruption to their life.
Of course.
They have so many things that have periods where they do or don't work and so on during the migration. They go through a mess. And in the end, often at best, they're back where they started.
Yeah, or worse off. Right?
And so the users are sitting there saying, what was that all about?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And they literally don't see that there was any point to this pain that they've just gone through, right?
Correct. No, I'm fully with you there on that. I agree. I agree entirely. So what do we do instead? Let's talk transformation.
Yeah, so look, there's different layers to the transformation, but one of the things that I think is incredibly important is obviously that you choose which things to migrate and in the right way, and you replace things that are not good candidates for migration, right? And you've got to categorize things appropriately as to what moves and what doesn't. But to me, a big thing that you need to do is make sure that early on in the process, you tackle something that will make the situation for the end users better.
Yep.
And so you do something in that process that's going to make them smile.
Okay.
Early on in the process, because they are going to go through and have to suffer things along the way. You want them to see a light at the other end that says this is a good thing for the business, right?
Okay.
That's super important. It also there's other aspects to this. I mean, if all you do, for example, in the case of databases and things, is pick them up that are running on VMs and stick them running in VMs in the cloud, well, what exactly have you done? Except you probably now have VMs with poorer I/O and so on characteristics than what you started with, right?
The thing is, that's just not the best way of doing it. There are many options. There are many other options for running databases in the cloud.
And so the thing I look at in the case of those things is that you really want to move to a situation where, from the IT people point of view, you do improve the situation. And so I look at things like, in the case of SQL Server, for example, I mean, we can run SQL Server on a VM. I can run a SQL Server managed instance. I can run an Azure SQL database, and so on. If I end up doing anything except an Azure SQL database, I feel like I have failed, right? Because I want to get the company to a point where that's how they run, right? Okay. Like, I mean, I look at our own databases, and years ago, I cannot tell you the number of times I used to have to do things to keep them running and stuff like that. From the minute I moved our own databases to Azure SQL database, I have never thought about those databases again.
Exactly. No patching, no maintaining, no upgrading, no emptying logs, nothing.
This has to happen, right? And so but the thing is, it won't happen just, without a little bit of pain in amongst there, right?
Yeah, and there should be a silver line. There should be a trophy at the end of the rainbow or something like that.
Yeah. And look, and I blame Microsoft on this one too, because if you look at from the point of view of the cloud vendor, what they're interested in is getting you migrated onto their infrastructure as quickly as possible, and as friction-free as possible. They don't really want to talk too much about transformation on the way. So in the case of a SQL Server workload, they will move you, for example, onto a SQL managed instance. Now, cost-wise, to me, there are very few clients for whom that makes sense, right?
I see.
However, if you look at why they move them there, it's because there are things like agent jobs and, service broker and SQL CLR. There's certain things that don't work, in Azure SQL database, in the pure platform service, as opposed to this sort of hybrid type service.
But those are few scenarios. But
that's right, and there's very few of them.
Yeah.
And there are better solutions.
Okay.
There's better solutions for those same things. Sure. So you need to sort of stop and say, hang on, let's do the work to make that work, and then the whole thing is better off and will cost us far less going forward.
So that's the transformation that you're alluding to. You have to, you have to take some care to see, okay, our database from on-prem, and the application calling that database does not work exactly using the, for example, platform service database offering. But that would be the best target for us to have. So we'll transform the thing we had so that it works the best possible way. Yeah.
Whereas if you look at the typical tooling and everything that comes from Microsoft or the vendors who are the cloud service architect and so on, what they will look at doing is doing the least friction migration for you with a discussion that sometime down the track you might do the transformation work. But the thing is that we know that never happens, right? And so what you end up is stuck on something that ends up costing a lot more than what you were thinking.
I agree with that, but just to complete the picture, there are scenarios, few of them, but they exist where you kind of have to do it that way. You must leave. For example, you have a contract with a hosting provider about to end, or you have some other reason that is a real reason why we must pick up our things and huddle really, really quickly. Just put over to the cloud and put it there, and it's working.
But the number one culprits in this are the software vendors, the ISVs.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, for example, I had a client a little while ago went to, a new accounting system, and they were saying, "Hey, how can we run this?" And the vendor, of course, had not tested any other options, and all they say to them is, "You need to install it on a VM." Because that's the only thing the vendor knows, right?
That's the only thing they've tried.
And so this is another thing I really want Microsoft to do, is to get stronger in outreach to the software vendors.
Yeah, good idea.
Because they are the ones that will often end up blocking the transformation.
Yeah.
But the other one that I do want to throw in while we're sort of talking about these things, the other really big one for me is identity. I still see far too many applications that manage all their own identity and so on. And again, they get picked up and dragged into the cloud. And then you still have all of these little pockets of identity and so on. That's a classic example where you need to clean up your whole identity story, because in the end, you're in a much stronger situation. And when I'm dealing with like large financials, it horrifies me to see them all still, doing their own authentication systems,
local
things like this.
users
This
in the
is
database
not
server
good,
and things like that. Yeah. No, I get it. That's a real pain. I agree with that. So, if we want to kind of sum up this story here, what should a company do to make a plan for transformation? What do you do differently than just taking the advice of the platform vendor and says, "Hey, we can use this migration wizard. It's really cool because it'll just migrate things and it'll be so painless." First of all, it's not so painless. Not all the time. Second, sure, it works. It's good in the cloud, but it can be great. So how do you make a plan for a great transformation story?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to it. No question at all. But I think the important thing is, as part of that planning, you need to lay out the order in which you're going to do things. And clearly there are applications that will pick up and move with almost no effort at all. There are applications that will take some effort to move. There are other applications that will be incredibly painful. And you need to potentially bite the bullet and say, maybe we will move those, but they're going to be the first ones replaced. So we need to have a scheme where they get replaced. What does concern me is I see a lot of organizations who think cloud computing is just VMs running in the cloud, right? Now, at some level, pretty much everything in the cloud is but the thing is, from the user's point of view, it's not just all VMs, right? It's something that the AWS people around here in Australia have done a wonderful job of, early on. They went to enterprises and they just sold them tons and tons and tons of VM resources. Sure. And so there's a whole pile of clients who the only thing they ever think of when they think about cloud is, how do I make it run on those AWS VMs that I've already pre-purchased?
That's a shame. That's where Microsoft actually started on the other end of that spectrum, saying the only thing we have is a platform offering. You cannot have anything else. And then, of course, they they gave people a VM later because the market demanded it because of what you just said, right? Some people just they only know a VM. And when you only know a VM, you can't be faulted for it. So this is a lot about knowledge and understanding what else could I be doing, which is not a traditional VM.
A final one I'd throw in the mix here too is transformation of the IT team itself. You know, far too many on-premises IT teams still haven't embraced like infrastructure as code or, you know, these sorts of concepts. They're still in there provisioning. You know, they still, when they get to the cloud, they go in there and they start provisioning VMs manually and configuring the VMs manually and so on. You know, that needs to be an early part of the whole process. That those people need to learn. That is not the way to do it anymore. Absolutely.
That's brilliant. So you have to focus on those skills and upskill and figure out what team composition and what people is it that you actually do need to have.
But as I said, early on, focus on something that will make your users smile.
Yeah, that's a good solid tip, and we'll let that be the final word. Thank you so much for being on the Cloud Show today, Dr. Greg. Brilliant to have you with us, and I'll see you around somewhere soon, hopefully.
I'm sure you will.
Bye-bye, everyone.